One day, I woke up and realized I was in my mid-20s. I couldn't think of anything particularly significant that I had done with my life, but I couldn't find enough of a reason to care. I had the looming sense that I could have already been halfway through my life, or perhaps even 3/4. After all, the illusory nature of life makes us feel like we don't have an expiration date, even though that date could be tomorrow. I knew my time here would end eventually, whether that be today or in 50 years. That much was certain. Everything else, however, left me perplexed. How was I supposed to know what I should do? Even in the most prehistoric era of video games, people had access to guides and magazines like Nintendo Power or within the manual of the case it came in. But the game of life had no such luxury. Life is the biggest sandbox game that has ever been created, like Minecraft on steroids. And you'd think that would make it have the same exploratory sense of wonder like Minecraft does, but the consequences of losing all your items in real life pose a much greater threat to your well-being than accidentally falling into lava in a cave in a pixelated world. By having the ability to grasp any opportunity at my fingertips, I simultaneously acquired its necessary counterpart: complete and total confusion caused by decision fatigue. And unlike video games, everybody did not start on a level playing field. Not by a long shot. Yeah, some video games let you choose certain attributes and builds that lead to you having a bit more of an advantage over other builds, but the complexity and extent of fairness between these builds in real life was exacerbated to the point of discrimination. This life certainly is a game. I've seen too many similarities in the rules between the games I've played by pushing a few buttons and the movement of my character that performs different actions in real life. And if that is the case, it means there's a way to beat it. Maybe not in the literal sense of the word, but in a similar sense to Minecraft, where you've acquired enough resources to not have to worry about food and shelter anymore, and there's still some meaningful tasks you can work on to grow your own world. If I was to accomplish this, I knew that there must be two rules that were necessary to follow. I had at least figured out this much after 20-something years. The first rule was that I needed to increase my ability to make my own choices. And the second, to reduce the amount of choices I was allowed to make. So I started with the first one. The answer to why I needed this in order to play the game optimally seemed obvious, but I feel I should explain it here. I've always hated being told what to do, and up until this point in my life, I had almost no say in my daily activities. When my parents told me to do a chore, I could opt out of it, but then I'd be punished by them. If I didn't go to school, I would get punished in the form of bad grades. If I did not behave in a manner that was congruent with society's expectations of how a young man should behave, I would get socially ostracized. Most of my daily activities were not by my own doing. I lacked any sort of freedom because I was a man-child, and I was a man-child because I lacked any sort of freedom. It was clear to me that one of the most important things that I needed to obtain in order to level up my freedom of choice was money. I felt I had pretty valid reasons for being dead broke at 20-something. Not only was there less of a societal urge to move out, get a job, and buy your own place in this postmodern world, but the price of renting an apartment couldn't possibly compare to the 7 raspberries my parents bought their house for. This battle against inflation and increasing house prices might leave me more hopeless than when I started, but it was better than spending another Sunday staring at the ceiling, getting increasingly uneasy until I started consuming content to make my brain go quiet. Wait, what was I even doing this for anyway? Had I too finally felt that societal pressure after blasting my eyes with enough content, which fed me stories of isolated loners who became the main character? Or did I have a deeper desire buried beneath the surface? I knew I needed an answer to the latter question, but I disregarded looking for it because I was too excited at the prospect of having a life I could truly call my own. The quickest forms of making money often seem to be the loudest. Clip famous streamers, make a faceless page and farm engagement, find a product on Alibaba and sell it for an aggrandized price just because the website looks pretty, invest in crypto, day trade. But what would any of that really teach me? If I was pursuing a path in life for the sole purpose of making money, that is, if the choices I made revolved around money, then wouldn't I still be in the same predicament of not making my own choices? I didn't want to be a slave to money and be dissatisfied with what I had to do to get it. I wanted there to be meaning behind my creations for the world. In order to do that, I knew that it needed to be for me first. For this little kid who had so many dreams and aspirations, who thought he could bend reality to his will through his imaginative efforts, but lost his way sometime down the road. And to fill some hole that had been drilled through me by the monotonous routine of working part-time, studying, exercising occasionally, going out to drink on the weekends, then doing it all over again for no real rhyme or reason. In the end, I decided to choose something that was challenging, rewarding, and lucrative all at the same time: graphic design. Every now and then, I'd have the impulse to draw, a long-lost hobby of mine that dated back to the first time my parents bought me tracing paper and a Pokemon art book. But graphic design blended my love for digital and analog into one modern format. The biggest problem I now faced was generating the right ideas. In this attention economy, how was I supposed to market myself and my work in a way that would get people to stop and choose to view my creations over the millions of other options they had at their disposal? In order to answer this question, I sought answers from those who had already accomplished what I wanted to achieve. And I started my learning journey on the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry pros, including the pros in graphic design. When I started my account creation, I felt that overwhelming sense of confusion again. What am I really most interested in? Wasn't there a better way to do this? I was pleasantly surprised when I had realized Skillshare had just recently designed what they call Learning Paths, which unintentionally took care of rule number 2 in my adventure towards a more meaningful life. The obvious choice for me was their path titled Creative Productivity, Kickstart and Sustain Any Project. The classes are meant to be taken in order and reinforce the lessons in one another. It was perfect for my beginner-leveled mind, and just like in my favorite RPG games, I felt like I had quietly leveled up my real-life character upon completion. I was amazed at how many different avenues were laid out for creatives, whether one was trying to become a photographer, video editor, videographer, freelancer, or any other online creative business identity. And Skillshare was kind enough to give me a link, which is the first link in the description, to give you guys a 1-month free trial. The first 500 people to use that link will get the 1-month free trial. So if this story has resonated with you thus far, then do yourself a favor and be one of those 500 people. Now, I had my notes. I had my ideas generated by the help of this learning path. I had a stronger direction. I had maximized my workflow. But when I looked at my desk, nothing had changed. In that moment, I recognized that I had yet to do any actual work. It reminded me of a quote I had once seen: "Start, then learn. Don't learn, then start." But maybe a better version of that quote was to start and learn simultaneously, so long as the learning isn't keeping you from starting. With another daily task added to my plate, it became more difficult to balance things. I found I had to sacrifice one pleasure for another, one form of pain for a different but more bearable one. And by bearable, I meant bearable in the sense that more of the choices that I made were my own. Still though, these choices were, in fact, painful. There were plenty of days where I didn't feel like doing the work, which disoriented me at first. I wasn't under the impression that all my existential thoughts would vaporize, but I didn't think I'd still feel so much internal blockage and negativity when I was finally starting to live for my higher self. And in this early part of my journey from man-child to man-competent, I faced a blinding realization. Things were harder now. I faced more agony at the thought that this might never become what I had initially envisioned. I was having more sleepless nights, less time seeing friends or talking to them on Discord. I was working my part-time job during the day and my personal brand at night. I was actually suffering more now than when I was in my comfortable state of uncomfortableness, because that involved more leisurely time and more guidelines to follow that were imposed upon me by other people. Amongst this realization though, I always kept this thought in mind. At least it will be meaningful suffering this time around. There must have been a way to make it as fun as I possibly could, despite the lack of tangible results in the form of amassed wealth that I could quantify. After all, weren't you supposed to play games because they're fun? Where was the fun in this? I had to quickly remind myself of why I started. Freedom, inducing more childlike wonder in me, just like when I roleplayed with my friends as a kid and I was a monster trying to catch the humans dashing around the playground. That had a sense of imagination in it, like you didn't know what was going to happen next or who would win, and it posed a fun challenge. Yes, that's what this life was. This life was the most marvelous game in which you never knew what was going to happen next. In the end, you could win everything or nothing, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that you were enjoying the game and not trying to reach the end of the game as fast as you could. It's supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be difficult. That's what I started telling myself. The grind isn't guaranteed to pay off like it is in video games, but that only added to the importance of enjoying what I did without the need for external metrics. So I started imagining these challenges as something fun. After every new design that would flop when I published it, I would do these two things: take what I learned and reiterate it into something better, and make sure the answer was yes to the question, did I enjoy the process of making this thing? If those two requirements were met, I saw myself as having succeeded another day in this game. Because I found out that in this game of life, you make your own rules in the form of beliefs, dreams, and ideals. I felt like I was starting to understand how to play the game of the attention economy more thoroughly. Through repeated failures, I got a sense of what did and didn't resonate with the small audience I had. A few of my posts got over 1,000 views, then 10,000 views, then 100,000. I don't mean to make it seem like this was a process that could fit in the span of a short story. This process takes years or even decades. But then, it happens all at once. I quickly found out that it wasn't enough to garner hundreds of thousands of views on social media. Now that I had a loyal following, I wanted to give them higher level paid content in the form of tutorials, personal lessons, and products. It was such an odd feeling when I made my first sale online. And when I saw the money hit my bank account, I reframed the idea of generating wealth in my head completely. Money itself is completely useless, but what mattered was what the money represented. Transferring money is the exchanging of energies between two people, whether that be energy in the form of time, effort, or skill. So if I wanted more of this arbitrary representation of energy, then I just needed to provide more valuable energy to the world. This wasn't always the case with making more money, which was clearly exemplified in the amount of useless, invaluable things that made money simply due to their manipulative marketing tactics. But I didn't want that to be me. And now I was providing more valuable energy to the world through a medium which I actually enjoyed. For a while, life got easier. I had fully conquered the first rule I had to follow to live a more meaningful and less confusing life, and I increased the freedom I had over the choices I made by making money, buying my own place, and owning a car. But this came with a host of new problems. It was all on me now. Whether I ate good that day, had clean clothes, went to bed on time, kept the business thriving, these were all responsibilities I had to shoulder. But that's another unwritten rule of the game of life. Life is an endless process of exchanging worse problems for better ones. And I did think that these problems were objectively better. In this scattered exchangement of energy and problems, I had unknowingly started to embody the second rule that I knew would make life more meaningful and less confusing. I had significantly reduced the amount of options I was allowed to make. You see, the more that you take on positive responsibilities, the more that you constrain yourself. And unlike the constraints imposed upon you by others, which were the constraints I always hated, these constraints were enacted upon by my own will that simplified my daily actions and thoughts. Now that I had the power to do almost anything, the most important question wasn't, what should I do, but what shouldn't I do? It's funny, the more that I got the one thing I wanted above all else, freedom, the less I wanted it. No using my phone after a certain time. No playing video games on certain days of the week. No doing anything but work for a few hours a day. The discipline I instilled into my life drastically reduced my daily decision fatigue and produced direction. And it made a lot of those old overthinking habits that I feel I've always had, that only amplified in relevance once I took on the near impossible task of making money doing something I enjoy, start to shed away. I generally enjoy most days. How could I not? I'd spent years on something that I made for me that ended up being valuable to others, turned it into a lucrative business, made some pretty wise observations about the game of life, and the people around me even started treating me better. I wasn't the richest dude on the planet, but I did well enough. I didn't have many, if any, friends, but I no longer felt drained around the people I did decide to surround myself with. The existential dread that played on a loop in my head had finally faded away. Until it didn't. I woke up in my new bed with its more intricately designed bed frame, silk sheets, and more pillows than necessary for just one man. And I felt the same feeling that had rippled through me on the day I had woken up and realized I was in my mid-20s. A Charles Bukowski quote I had read somewhere entered my mind. When nobody wakes you up in the morning, and when nobody waits for you at night, and when you can do whatever you want, what do you call it? Freedom? Or loneliness? I couldn't find the answer to this question, and I don't think anyone ever will. The truth is, I had conquered the postmodern condition of the average 20-something Western man-child, but when it came down to it, nothing had really changed at all. I guess this must have been how Sisyphus felt in the Greek mythology story when he was sentenced to push a boulder up the hill, only to have it roll to the bottom every time he almost reached the top. I don't mean to discourage the listener from not figuring out the way in which they themselves can achieve these rules for life. I had undoubtedly improved my mental health and my willingness to go on in this game through the actions I have laid out here. But the end point you think you will find by embarking on this journey does not really exist. So long as you have desires, your desires will always find a way to outweigh your contentment. Getting there will always feel one step out of reach. But this isn't morbid. In fact, I think it's beautiful. Life is an endless series of chasing a feeling, of swapping your current problems for better ones, of having shitty days that make it feel like the world is ending, that you're worthless, and that you've lost all progress, all to eventually lead to spontaneously adopting a "we're so back" mentality out of nowhere. And trust me when I say this, it's so much better to figure all this out by actually giving it a shot yourself than thinking you understand it and not trying just because you've listened to my words. Want to really beat this game of life? Don't find a way to beat it. There is no final level, and success is whatever you define an enjoyable life that makes you generally pretty happy to wake up most days to be. Utilize the rules that apply to everybody, but mold them into a way that puts off the thoughts of, what's this all for anyways, just a little bit longer. At the very least, I know you can do that. But it starts with you finding that thing that's worth suffering for. No matter how hopeless you might feel in the present moment, it's out there waiting for you to grasp it. And I know this because I too was once the young man sitting off the edge of his bed, doubtful that any of his achievements would amount to anything meaningful. I'm still that same young man, just with much fewer doubts and a slightly larger bed. I hope you enjoyed this short story that I wrote. Maybe it left you with more questions than answers, but I like to do that with my videos. But if you have questions that you want answered and you want to meet like-minded people who are also on the journey to self-actualization, you should check out my free self-improvement community. The link is in the description. I have resources in there. It's really fun. I'm in there most days at the time of recording this video. Really, you should check it out. It's a great time, and you'll get advice and you'll give advice, and yeah, just check it out. You might meet amazing people in there. And if you like these sort of short stories with life lessons in them, check out my whole playlist of videos like this that I've made. I really enjoy these. These are some of my favorites, and I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.